he's kind of walking through and kind of catches himself singing or mouthing it, and then kind of gets shy. You know that thing where it kind of stops. I don't know if you've ever been singing in your car to a song you like. And then kind of the mundane, normal walk, it looks like he's walking to work or school or whatever he's going to, turns into this moment of worship as he connects with God. And I think some would say this is the power of music. Absolutely, music and art connects us, our emotions to God, and our brain and our mind as well. But I think even more than that, it's the changing perspective. Here he is walking to school, walking to work through the city, and suddenly he's connected to God. He has a different perspective on where he's at and what's going on. And by the end, he's singing out loud. That moment where the music cuts out and it's just him singing. If you've ever worn earphones, that is a terrifying moment when you begin to do that. And I love how just unashamed and kneeling in the middle of the sidewalk in the intersection. So I thought that was just what I want to talk about. That he's living in both of those worlds. He's in the city, walking to work, normal life, people around him, has to be aware of buses and people walking toward him. But at the same time, he's also in this other place. He's in the unseen world. He's worshiping. He's connecting to God in a way that goes beyond just what we see. And I love that. So we want to talk about perspective today in the next few weeks. And I had a subtitle. It doesn't really say it, but the idea I think I want us to do is how do we change our perspective from my perspective, to God's. Now I can't be God. There will always be a push and pull, so that's why I don't like that subtitle completely, but that's the idea. We want to see, how can we see life the way God wants us to? How can we see the world according to God's view rather than just always mine? Perspective can be influenced by so much. Laying there in the dark at night. Do you ever have every horrible, embarrassing moment in your life come crowding in at that moment? In 8th grade, when I tripped and spilled in front of the whole cafeteria, and that comes up. I couldn't even name any of my friends at that. I couldn't remember anything except for that moment in vivid detail at about 1:30 in the morning when I wake up is right there with me. Or a noise at night. I saw a little skit, someone was doing a little video they did of sleeping at grandma's house, and it shows this guy laying there on a flowered couch with an Afghan pulled up around him, and the refrigerator is rattling and making all this noise, and there's a clock, the tick-tock of a big loud clock, and creaking floor, and I was like, oh, I've been to that house. I know what that is exactly like. Crushed velvet couch, sleeping on that, it's 1,000 degrees, and the loudest appliances in the world. You can tell me later. Thanks. Write it down so you don't forget. She's actually doing that. I love that so much. Some of the issues we have in life cause sometimes different perspectives cause fights. Do you ever drive? Anybody drive cars with another person? The gas gauge was designed for the driver to see how much gas is in it. That when the passenger looks at the gas gauge, the perspectives are off. It looks like you have less than you have. I got to admit on that one, that's me. I'm the one who has that panic. Deb is the queen of, God is going to perform a miracle and we'll have enough gas to get to the next station. And so I look over and panic. However, the speedometer also has the same issue, where it looks like you're going faster than you really are going if you're looking from the passenger seat rather than from right in front of it. The perspective of how close and how fast you're coming up on a car that's slowing down in front of you. There's two different perspectives on that. Some people feel like you're hurtling at a crazy speed and are going to ram into that car, and the only hope for survival that you have is to clutch the thing next to you and to scream for help. The other person knows, I already have my foot off the gas and I'm beginning to slow down so we don't go through the windshield. And sometimes there's perspective of the driver may make an error, me, and think, oh, I have plenty of room to squeeze around this. I remember a very specific time we were pulling into a parking garage And Deb was working hard at that point. We'd only been married maybe 10 years at that point. And she was like, I'm just not going to nag him. And so there's like one of those yellow posts. And she's like, he's going to hit it. He's going to hit it. And I was like, I have plenty of room. And it couldn't have been more comedic timing perfectly. I have plenty of room. Scraped the entire side of the minivan. Different perspective, yeah. My yellow streak of shame on the minivan. There's perspective when the kids come home in the kitchen, where kids will come home and say, there's no food in this house. And I'm like, we have all sorts of food. There's pantries and refrigerator and freezer full of food. And they're like, yeah, that's just ingredients. I want food. A carnival, when the carnival comes to Paulsbo for the Viking Fest, little kids see it as a magical place of fun and adventure and whimsy. In reality, they are rickety, erector set toys that are meant to hurl you around, that are run by a guy whose one pupil is larger than the other, and he has no training and will be out of town the next day. I hesitate to say this one because this could actually, I don't want to bring it up, but some people see an old car as an amazing project that we can restore and maybe even make money on and have a cool thing in our lives. Other people may see them as a rusting hulk in front of the house. The reality of that is, it's a rusting hulk in front of the house. If we have the wrong perspective, if we have a different perspective, sometimes it can change our whole way of thinking. Can change the whole way we see life. Can change our whole mood, our experience, how we treat others, how we treat ourselves, and how we respond. I think I have sometimes a wrong perspective that it makes me, if I have a wrong perspective about myself or about you or about situations in the world or even about God, I become defensive, I become indecisive, I become insecure, I become angry. There's all these things that can happen when we don't see the world the way God wants us to see it. So we're going to start this week just to introduce it. One of my favorite stories in the Bible. So we're going to start. I just want to read, this is kind of by way of introduction. We'll start with this. This is the story of Elijah. Elijah has a lot of great stories. This comes right after the floating axe, one of the weirdest stories in the Bible. That it was recorded that they're cutting trees, and a guy borrows an axe from somebody else, and the axe head flies off it and goes into the lake, or into the river, and he goes to Elijah, the man of God, the prophet, and he says, hey, I'm in trouble. I borrowed my friend's Makeda axe, and I broke it, and it's lost in the river, and Elisha makes it float to the surface. I love that God cared enough about tools to save that guy's relationship. So right after that, we have this story. It's in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8, starts this. Then the king of Aram was at war with Israel. He would confer with his officers and say, we will mobilize our forces at such and such a place. But immediately Elisha, the man of God, would warn the king of Israel, hey, don't go near that place, for the Arameans are planning to mobilize their troops there. So the king of Israel would send word to that place indicated by the man of God. And time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he would be on alert there. So the king of Aram became very upset over this. He's got his schemes and his plans, and he's making these intricate military plans to defeat the king of Israel. And every time it just keeps falling through. They know ahead of time. They're either ready for him or they're not there. So he became very upset over this. And he called his officers together and demanded, which of you is a traitor who has been informing the king of Israel of my plans? And I love this. They're like, it's not us, Lord King. One of the officers replies, it's Elijah, the prophet of Israel. He tells the king of Israel, even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom. Zoinks. Right? And I love the fact, A, that the officers were saving their own skin, but also they're like, no, this is not normal. They have intelligence that we don't have. God is telling Elisha, and Elisha's telling the king, and he knows everything, even what you're whispering. And that the king kind of goes, oh, that makes sense. Different perspective back then, right? So he says, go and find out where he is, Elisha, the king commanded, so I can send troops to seize him. And the report came back, Elijah's in Dothan. And so one night the king of Aram sent a great army with him and many chariots and horses to surround that city. So he's plotting against Israel. Elijah keeps ratting him out his plans, and the king of Aram is angry. And so he sends an entire, obviously an army, like I don't know what their cohort is, but a ton of soldiers, more than enough to surround the city just to get Elijah so that he can do his plans and stop having his plans thwarted. And this story goes on, it gets even crazier. I mean, that's crazy enough, right? That God is telling them, hey, telling a prophet, and that the king of Israel is listening to him, and it keeps working. But we're going to talk about seeing. Today we're talking about seeing. So the first point is really seeing. Really seeing. So it goes on. 2 Kings 6:15-17 says this. When the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what will we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. "Don't be afraid," Elijah told him, "for there are more on our side than theirs." And then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." And the Lord opened the young man's eyes. And when he looked up, he saw that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. Did anybody else hear the song when I said chariots of fire? So here's the story, right? The army comes, surrounds the city, and this poor servant wakes up, gets up, is getting ready for the day, doing his normal stuff, getting ready to take care of his master. Kind of a Downton Abbey kind of a thing where they come in with a tray of tea and toast and they open the curtains, and right? So he gets up doing his normal daily stuff that seems important. It's part of his life. That's his reason for living, is being a servant, taking care of his master. Do you ever have moments when your daily routine is messed up by something minor and it ruins your whole day? We have a little change in perspective. Some little thing goes off and it messes with our mood. The biggest lie a human can tell themselves: you know what, I'll get gas in the morning on my way. And you kind of forget that, you're running late, and you get in the car and you realize that the whole day is ruined. Or there's no coffee pods, and you have to make French press or pour over, and that takes almost 3 minutes longer. Or for me, that the cat wants out, and then the cat wants in, and then the cat wants out, and then the cat has to sit there and decide. My whole morning is ruined. Also, your morning can go better. Have you ever walked into the office or your classroom or wherever, and it's donut day? Oh, the day is so much better at that moment. Or you get the good parking spot, the one that's never really open, and you get that great spot. For me, my whole day can get better when I go into the bathroom in the morning and realize, oh, I have a fresh new tube of toothpaste. Oh, my day's going to be great. Or I had done laundry and the good socks are clean. That is a fantastic day. Things that we face that are small, our perspective takes on this great importance sometimes, until we're faced with a crisis. The perspective of the servant changes because of what he saw. He was doing his normal morning routine, doing whatever he had to do, and he goes outside, and you can kind of see it, can't you? Walking outside, doing his thing, looks up, and there's an entire enemy army surrounding him. Suddenly, whatever little task he was doing lost most of its importance. So he runs back in. He has a and here's the thing, he has a legitimate response. I've heard this talked about in sermons and read some stuff. They kind of make fun of the servant sometimes. He's kind of a comedic character. One commentator that I was reading this week said, actually, this is a comedic break in the story. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I get it. There's some kind of chuckly things, but I don't think it's fair to make fun of the servant. He had the legitimate response based on experience and observation of what happens when an enemy army is surrounding you. And so he panics. He runs back into Elisha and is like, what are we going to do? His perspective is one of doom based on the normal understanding of how the world works. If there is an army there who's out for your blood, and it's you're going to lose. But Elijah has a different response. He says, hey, don't be afraid, based on his experience and observation. I love that he says, hey, there's more of us than them. And I'm imagining the servant going, 1, 2, nope. I don't know this is some new definition of more than I was previously aware of. But Elijah understands, because he sees the army. He knows what's going down. He believes the servant. But based on his observation and his experience, there's more on his side. Elijah's seen God work beyond the normal. He parted the waters of the Jordan River. He saw God purify the water in Jericho through him. He's the one, there's that weird story about the she-bears attacking people that were making fun of him. He provided the widow's oil, Deb. That's what Deb's hoping in the gas tank, is that God is providing the widow's oil. Right? That she had a little pot, just a little bit of oil for one more piece of bread, one more loaf. And then she emptied, he says, use it all, make me a snack. And so she does, and then it keeps filling up, the magical, unending oil. And had to get all the friends, like, let's fill up all the jugs. The Shunammite woman's son was resurrected, raised from the dead. Purified the poisoned soup. I mean, just this gamut of weird stuff that doesn't normally happen. Elijah got to be a part of that stuff. Excuse me. Naaman, who had leprosy, went to Elijah and he's like, go dunk your son. The timeline, obviously some of this happened afterward, but you know what I mean? Elijah was like, hey, you know what's normal is the normal world here, but there's also this other stuff going on that I'm just not that worried about it. There's more behind us than behind them. And the axe head. Elijah had seen God work beyond the physical world. His perspective changed to God's perspective because he lived in both worlds. He was aware of and lived in both the seen and the unseen world, and seen how God worked. So let's ask ourselves a couple of things. What are the routine, normal things that we might need to be willing to see go differently, to reframe, to change our perspective? There are some things in our life that are real, that are important, that require attention, and they are responsibilities, but maybe they need to take less importance as we understand that there is the seen and the unseen world. Maybe they're more central than they should be. It doesn't mean we deny them, doesn't mean we pretend that they don't exist, but we understand there is more out there. There's more to see than what's right in front of us. Examples, I was trying to just think, maybe it's my job, maybe it's a class I'm taking, maybe it's I'm worried about others respect me and how they treat me, my health, the things that I can control and can't control, bills, the retirement fund, making sure I have enough leisure and entertainment, politics, the news, all of these things that are genuinely real things that we need to pay attention to and we need to deal with, that are part of really living, but maybe they're not as central because there's more on our side than that. There's more to life than that. Our perspective needs to see more, see beyond those things. Maybe we need to ask God to help us see past these things to see the bigger picture that he is working on. There's more that he's doing than some of that we see right in front of us. Doesn't mean to ignore or minimize, but we need to correctly prioritize that stuff. I don't know what the servant had to do in his morning routine, but after all this, he probably still had to go back and draw water and light fires and make food. We're living in both worlds. We need to see both worlds. We need to see the bigger picture, the spiritual world, the world that we don't see as well as the world we see. What in our life causes us to panic? So those things that we see as normal and part of life, there are moments that tips, it's a razor's edge. There's moments that those things tip into causing us to worry and have anxiety and panic rather than live in the real world and have an understanding of responsibility. World events, elections, my family and friends, my future. What would it mean to have God open our eyes to see his army in those circumstances? What would that look like for us to see beyond what we're worried about? Realize that the world that we live in and our calling is to love and be loved here, not to fix or control. We can admit that it is hard and painful, and yet things of this world do not have the ability to destroy us or destroy our soul. I think one of the things that helps us, those things that cause us to panic when we're asking God to give us a different perspective, to see his way, is other people around us. We need to look for the people who can help us see beyond what we see in front of us. Elisha was there to help the servant see beyond what was right in front of him. Someone who will call us out actively to see what God is doing and help us see that. Whether that's kindness practiced, remembering those around us who love us, to remember how God has helped in the past, all those things that others can remind us to help us see beyond the troubles in front of us. We must be willing to allow God to open our eyes to see the reality of his love and care for us, to see his army of protection from his son. I think there's the more I thought about this, and I hope I can explain this well. If I can't, sorry. I think there's a common human understanding that there is a spiritual world, that there is a world beyond what we can physically touch and experience, beyond the senses. We can train ourselves, and we need to work at asking ourselves to see that. And I'm not talking, this is where, I'm not talking weird, like, visions necessarily, or the mystical. I'm just talking about there is a world that goes on, a life that goes on beyond what is right in front of us. And I mean, because there's an emotional world, we can't see emotions, we can't see love, we can't grab that. There's a mental and spiritual world. I think even people who don't believe in God have an understanding that there is a world that goes on, a life that goes on beyond what we can touch and feel and sense. And we need to exercise our ability to see the unseen reality. We must train and expect to see beyond the natural. We have to be intentional to grab onto this. And this is an imperfect analogy. I love teaching this group because I feel like you guys give me some leeway sometimes to not make a lot of sense. I trust you to be smart enough to maybe either figure out something on your own on this or to track with me. Technology has made us lose some of that ability. Yesterday I was joking with Deb. I've been working on this message for a while, sitting at my desk, sitting at my computer. And my watch said, time to stand up. So I stood up, walked into the living room, bothered Deb for a little while she was working on something, which is one of my great forms of entertainment in my life. And then walked back down, and I was like, oh, my back is killing me, and my legs are hurting, and my knees. And I'm like, yeah, my watch just said I needed to stand up. And I'm like, you know what? I quit listening to my body, which was saying, you need to stand up. Your back is killing you. Your knees hurt, and your feet hurt. And I walked around for literally 30 seconds, and it went away. I felt better. But I had replaced my ability to understand kind of this unseen, this part of the world with something that's going to help me. Do you know somebody who's some weirdo who doesn't need an alarm clock to wake up at the right time? Or do you know somebody who just kind of knows what time it is based on, I guess, the sun or the wind or whatever? Those people who can say, it's probably about 2 o'clock. I'm like, especially living here, I will admit, living here many months out of the year, it could be 10 in the morning, could be 6:30 at night, who knows? Right? And so I know that there's all sorts of scientific explanation for some of that, but I think there's also, that gives us an example of what I'm talking about, that we've muted sometimes the ability for us to see the unseen world, to see the spiritual, to interact with God, to hear from God. We've muted that by finding and working so hard to control all of it, to read it, to study it, to know it absolutely. Just like we've muted the ability to hear our own bodies. So there is the mystical and the miraculous that happen, but I think there's also a daily understanding of emotional and spiritual and mental world that can be real, but it's a little more elusive, and we need to train ourselves to look for it, to open our eyes to see what's really out there. This is not anti-science or to ignore the scene, but an acknowledgement that they both exist and work together, and God uses both to impact our lives. So Elijah asked God to help him with both problems. The immediate problem of the army, and he asked for the unseen world. Now, if I were writing this story, the chariots of fire and the army of God around him seems like a pretty good way to handle that army that's attacking him. If, kind of like Lord of the Rings in the movies, where the army of the dead comes over and swarms and kills all the... You guys don't know? Anyway, that's kind of what I expect to happen here, is that the army of God swoops down and kills all the army of Aram, but that's not what happens. This other weird thing happens. So two, we need to see reality. So one is really seeing, the second is seeing reality. So the Aramean army advanced toward him, and Elisha prayed, "Oh Lord, please make them blind." So the Lord struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. And Elisha went out and told them, "You've come the wrong way. This isn't the right city. Follow me. I'll take you to the man you're looking for." And he led them to the city of Samaria. And as soon as they had entered the city in Samaria, Elisha prayed, "Oh Lord, now open their eyes and let them see." So the Lord opened their eyes, and they discovered that they were in the middle of Samaria, which, by the way, is the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel. And when the king of Israel saw them, he shouted to Elijah, "My father, should I kill them? Should I kill them?" And Elijah says, "Of course not." Elijah replied, "We do not kill prisoners of war. Give them food and drink and send them home again to their master." So the king made a great feast for them and sent them home to their master. After that, the Aramean raiders stayed away from the land of Israel. What? What story is this? This is nuts. So the soldiers start coming in. They're going to attack him. They're going to drag him off. And you can imagine the servant going, "Okay, I see the army of God," but... And then all of a sudden, Elijah has a different plan, right? He prays that they go blind. Suddenly they can't see. They become blind to reality, what was physically there, unable to see beyond their own experience and expertise. And being blind, their eyes are closed. It leads them, because they can't see, they're led into danger. And they have to trust somebody to guide them. And Elisha tricks them. I love this. Elijah comes out, so the whole army goes blind, and they kind of don't panic, which is weird to begin with. And Elijah goes out and says, "Hey, who are you looking for?" "Oh, Elijah? You know what? You're in the whole wrong place. Elijah, you know what? I know Elijah. I'll take you to him." So there's a lot going on here. Suddenly they're blind, and they decide to listen to some random guy who leads the entire army who's now blind, and they don't seem that surprised by that. Again, maybe in an age where miracles happened more, it was like, "Oh, here we go again," right? Also, did Elijah lie? We're going to take a little tangent. I know you're not used to that with me, taking weird tangents. That hurts that you laughed at that. It was really interesting to me how many authors and commentators bent over backwards to try and say, "No, Elijah didn't really lie." Like trying to make all these excuses to how, "It wasn't really, it was also," and yeah, he lied. The answer is yes, he lied. He lied. One of them was like, "Well, technically he did lead them to Elijah as he was the one with them." It's like, if your kid told you a lie and then tried to justify it like that, he'd be grounded. Right? One of them was like, "It's okay because it shows it's okay to deceive, it's to fulfill a godly purpose." No! God can use it, sure. We understand God can use things that are bad, or our moments when we fail, he somehow makes it work out for good. But that's not part of this. It's part of the story. Because, and here's my point. Just because a person in the Bible does something or says something doesn't mean it's a rule or a prescriptive event or even a good example. Sometimes we want to read into and find rules that then we can follow. "Oh, it's okay to lie. Elijah lied. I'm going to lie now." No. And find out, well, when, if there's an army coming toward me and he suddenly go blind, okay, that's when I'm going to write that down. I can lie at that point. No, he lied. I don't know whether it's good or bad in that moment. But just to remember, when we read the Bible, we're allowed to use our brain and understand we don't have to go through pretzel logic to make that happen. So Elisha leads them to Samaria, the capital city. where we assume they're a bunch of soldiers, right, for the king. And he says, okay, now take off the blindfold, God. And they open their eyes and they're like, oh, wait a minute. They're surrounded. And the king of Israel, I'm reading into this again, I wasn't there. But I'm imagining this the way it's read. It's, oh, yeah. Elijah, can we kill him now? Huh? Can we kill him? Can we slaughter our enemies? He assumed he'd get to slaughter them because, look, God's man delivered my enemy right to me. They have made a mistake and I can lay into them. Do you ever have those moments? Now is the chance I can get my petty revenge and I can do or say something. And I love that God's man says, no. We don't do that. We don't kill our captives. We're to love our enemies. Elijah goes all New Testament on him at this moment. And he's like, look, we love our enemies. What's going to do more good? What's going to allow people to connect to God better? So they provide this feast and a big party, and they seem to kind of make friends at some level, because then it goes on to say that these guys, they send back to the king, and from that point, for at least an extended period of time, these guys are like, we're not attacking Israel. They gave us food. Plus, they made us go blind. Right? So that those soldiers wouldn't attack Israel for a while. Pretty amazing story. But again, going to the idea of seeing reality, where are our eyes blind? Do we have a side or a team or a bias that we hide behind so we don't have to study and see the uncomfortable? Or maybe even change our mind? That's blindness. That's blindness, where we've decided long ago, this is what I believe, this is what I think, this is what I'm doing, and I'm never going to allow any new information to help me reevaluate, to grow, to change. That's blindness. We need to be able to see reality. Sometimes we think we know everything that we're ever going to need to know, and we've understood everything. If we really believe that, why should we continue to study Scripture? To just reaffirm what I already thought? Why should we continue to pray and ask God to reveal information to us? We've already figured it all out. No, we need to continue to be able to see reality, to look and to understand and be willing to continue to learn. None of us already knows it all. Do we have worry or fear that we just cannot face, so we just deny it and ignore it? That's blindness. And I do that. That is one of my struggles. I have to work hard. Do we have a system that we like and that we've crafted over the years that keeps us safe and comfortable so we can avoid anything outside of that? That's blindness. Anything that allows us to behave or believe in ways without actually considering what God wants right now, in this time, with these people, in this situation, can be blindness. Track with that? Anytime that we're like, I don't need to hear from God because I have a system that tells me what I do in every situation. And we know that God is personal. And we know that God is involved right now. And we know that God works with us different and other people differently and helps us understand how in every situation we can understand what he wants us to do. Now, does that mean there are no constants? Of course not. Yes, there are constants. Yes, there are core beliefs. But even those, we need to understand, may need to be applied differently, may need to be specifically applied. We need to be listening to God, asking him to show us the reality of this situation right now with these people. And in the middle of that, we need to be led. Sometimes when we're blind, we need to ask, who's leading me? Why am I here? When we're in those places where we've kind of blind ourselves, it's easy to find a leader and just let them do the seeing, let them do the thinking, let them do the deciding, let them be in control. So much easier to let a politician or a pastor or a teacher or a celebrity or anyone else guide us. We saw what happened to the army when they let a random guy lead them when they were blind. And I'll tell you, it's a tempting place for a human to have that kind of power over somebody else. Even good people may lead us astray. It's one of the things I struggle with. I know the awesome power of being the pastor of this church, the huge influence. But I hope, and I pray, that I will listen and that I will never rely on, hey, I'm your pastor, do what I said, that we'll work on it together. So we pray and we keep engaged, we be aware. We understand that eyes closed can lead to danger, so we need to always ask God to open our eyes to see reality. One test when we're talking about a leader, by the way, how do they treat people? Who's most important? Is it themselves, their followers, outsiders? I think the correct answer is their enemies. How do they treat their enemies? Do they love those who attack them? If you're following someone like that, that's probably a good place to start. So we'll end with this. It's a balance and a skill to learn and to live and know where to look and when to see the unseen and when to see the seen. I wish I had, my temptation is to try and give you a black and white, here's when and here's how this works. It's gray, it's nuanced. There are times that we have to be so connected to God and so involved with each other that we will know when and where to live in both worlds. Science is good, it is true, and yet it's not all truth. Mystical, spiritual awareness is necessary and true, but it can be subjective. We must be careful to know our own bias and our own comfort, and not accept and reject based on what I wish it were true or what I want to be true. It takes work and skill and faith and insight and time. There's discernment and intelligence and humility and study and awareness as we pursue wisdom. So how do we balance that? Just one practical thing. How do we do that? We look at God. Look at Jesus, how he lived and how he taught, and that will guide us when to see the seen and when to see the unseen. In this little story, we just need to remember that that is the underpinning message, that God did it, not Elijah. Elijah didn't blind him, God did. Elijah didn't open the eyes of his servant, God did. And we must follow God and trust him to do the impossible, and he wants us to know him more than anything. So I'll leave you with this verse by way of benediction. John 16:33. I have told you this so you may have peace. Here on earth you'll have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. May we be people who change our perspective by seeing the unseen world of the power, glory, and love of God, and live in the seen world where we can serve and care and grow. Thank you guys so much for letting me think through this in front of you this morning. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday.